Yes, that's right, we are back. And today I'm pretty excited because I'm starting a new backyard mini ramp project. The first step is going to be to make some concrete pool coping. Now, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to go for with this mini ramp, but I've decided on a concrete ramp to keep the noise down, and it makes sense to make some concrete coping. And I can foresee a few advantages with the concrete coping. Number one, it's going to be nice and cheap. Also, I'm not that confident with working concrete, and I think trying to set metal coping into concrete could be a headache. There's a bit of a dry time on the concrete, and if I get that relief incorrect, it's going to cause a headache and be very difficult to put right. So I think with the concrete coping, I can make a prototype of these, check that I've got the relief I like on the top, and then obviously when I come to pour the transition, I can blend the transition in to get the relief I want on the front. Now, I haven't got much experience of concrete work. My biggest concrete project to date was pouring the slab for my home studio, and that just about turned out okay, but it was a bit of a stress. And I think the thing about concrete is it's got a cure time and there's no going back. So it's sort of a one and done approach. I prefer working in wood because I can always take it apart if it goes a bit wrong. So I did a bit of research online, and I've got a coping block that I used on my old mini ramp extension. And it worked really nicely. This is from an actual pool, but there's a few things that I think could be improved for skateboarding. So number one, this has got no relief on the top at all, but it was still possible to lock in okay. It also sticks out the front a lot like original pool coping, and the front of the actual coping is not that deep. It's only about 2 inches. So I felt that this could be improved on for the mini ramp. And I think a bit of relief and a bit of fat coping will be our friend, because if I'm using a smaller transition, it will aid in the rocking of the board, and it will also aid in making sure that both wheels can be cleared for slides and rocks. Now, I managed to find some drawings online, and these were super helpful. It really simplified the idea in my head of making a mould for this. Simply a case of building a box and then finding a bit of PVC pipe to pop in the front to use as a form for the front of the coping. So I set sail on a mission to find all my materials, and my ethos with this build is to use a DIY approach and try and keep the cost to a bare minimum. So I went down the local plastic place and asked nicely if they had any offcuts of pipe, and by lucky hap they had a 2.5 foot bit that they didn't know what to do with. It was 60mm wide, and they gave me that for free, so I was super stoked. With that momentum, I pushed on into the hardware store and asked if they had any sheets of MDF going begging. And by lucky hap, they had a bit of plastic covered MDF, which I thought would be perfect to create the form for the top of the coping. Now, I managed to salvage a little bit of wood for the sides of the form from the stash that I've got at home. So that made the mould totally the best price, which of course is no money at all. So I set about putting together that mould. I followed the plans. I went for a 2 foot wide block, which is fairly standard, and a 1 foot deep block, which again is what you would expect from a bit of pool coping. I cut my surrounding wood into the correct lengths to create that 2 foot by 1 foot internal dimension. And then once that was screwed together, it was a case of cutting out the MDF to make the bottom of the box. Once I'd done that, I wrestled with many ideas for cutting the piece of pipe directly in half. I didn't have the tools to do this. I think a table saw would have made easy work of this, but I followed a few old school carpentry methods I picked up off my carpentry mates. And that was to get the saw so that you could see the reflection in the other side to make sure all my cuts were straight. And the big concern was getting this pipe to be cut straight so the front edge would be nice and uniform. Once I'd done that, I cut another piece of MDF to go inside to make a bit of a chamfer, make the back of the coping angled, and then jimmied it around a bit. I made everything a push fit and then used a hot glue gun just to make sure everything stayed in place. I also used some Bondo to smooth over where the coping joined with the MDF, and then also added a bit of packing tape just to make sure that surface was smooth. The final thing to think about before heading off to get the concrete was some sort of release agent. I researched this online and plumped for a bit of olive oil, which we wiped on liberally. Then it was time to go out and source some concrete. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't manage to blag this for the best price. I found the highest strength concrete I could find, and it looked like about the right amount to do one coping stone. So I mixed that up, popped the water in gradually, tried to get a nice consistent mix. So when I spooned that in, luckily it was just the right amount with a little bit of excess. I worked the top of the mould, just making sure that there was as much concrete in there pushed down as possible. And then I started hitting the side with a big mallet, and you could see all the air bubbles start to come to the top, which was pretty pleasing. I found the most effective method for getting the air bubbles out was to hit the mallet quickly and quite firmly. I also tried a power tool that sort of vibrates, and that seemed to work, but not quite as effectively as just tapping the side. So I continued with that method. I did about 10 minutes of tapping until no more air seemed to be coming to the top. And then it was just a case of working the top with a trowel to keep that nice and flat. And then I left it out of the sunlight just to cure, and also left it somewhere where the rain couldn't get to it. I could barely sleep a wink overnight. I was so excited to get up the next morning and see how it turned out. And I built the mould so that I could take the back off and also release the screws so I could jimmy the sides apart. And after a bit of wrestling, I managed to get the concrete to release out of the mould. And then it was a case of turning it over, and there she blows. It was pretty exciting to see how it turned out, and it was a little bit better than I expected. My biggest fear was there would be loads of air bubbles that would render the coping useless, but I think this is structurally fine. Then it was a case of popping it in some water, where I intend to leave it for about a month to cure. Now I think the water just slows down the curing process and also gives the concrete the correct amount of hydration so it doesn't dry out and crack. And I just want to make sure it's super strong so it won't chip when the trucks keep on hitting on top of it. And that is the coping block finished. I did a bit of a comparison with the original coping block just so you can see how the design differs. And I think that little bit more relief in the top is going to work a treat for skateboarding. I think it's also thick enough to really stick out and provide a bit of relief on that smaller mini ramp. I also couldn't resist taking the coping down the local skate park to compare it to the pool coping there. So I need to make 5 more of these, and I'm going to crack on. It's going to be a case of refreshing the mould each time and putting on more release agent. Once these have gone through the curing process in the water, I'm going to slap on some concrete sealant, and then the final thing to do will be to lacquer them up ready to skate. But there is a long way to go before that time comes. So let me know what you think of this coping in the comments below. And also, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe and the notifications button, because I'm going to be making updates about this mini ramp build from start to finish. As ever, my name's been John Bishop, and I'll see you next time.